Well, hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with Nestle and BP on reaching net zero in the age of political polarization. I'm Brendan Steele, Director at Future 500, and I'm excited to be moderating this discussion today, second in the virtual Future 500 Summit at EarthX. We're lucky to have corralled two senior leaders at Nestle and BP to ask a series of hard-hitting questions, not just from me, but also from you. We will leave plenty of time at end for Q&A, and Bob and Nicole are available for a few minutes after the end of the hour to take your questions as well. I want to take a moment to recognize our partner, EarthX. EarthX is an international nonprofit environmental forum whose purpose is to educate and inspire people to action towards a more sustainable future. EarthX epitomizes the slogan widely used today, "We are all in this together." And a moment about us. Many of you on the line have known Future 500 and our team for years now, but we're excited that the pivot to virtual has given us a chance to reach a wider audience. With offices in San Francisco and Portland, Future 500 is a global nonprofit consultancy that builds trust in companies, advocates, investors, and philanthropists, advance business as a force for good. So with that, let's meet our panelists for today. At this point, I'm going to invite Nicole Collier with Nestle and Bob Stout with BP to unmute themselves and turn on their videos. I'm going to do the same as gracefully as I can and turn off slides so that you can view our discussion. And welcome Bob and Nicole. Great to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Bob and Nicole, as many people here know, Future 500 is all about humanization. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about you. Just a moment, of course, on what you do at Nestle and BP and how long you've worked there, but more, what keeps you up at night? What are you excited about and the biggest challenges you hope to tackle? And one fun fact while you're at it.
I'll start. It's good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Collier. I'm the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at Nestle. I've been with the company about 5 years and been in Washington doing public policy, government affairs work for 20 years, which is hard for me to believe, but true. At Nestle, I do a lot of work on our plastics packaging, our sustainable packaging public policy agenda, as well as in our nutrition space and a lot of other kind of critical public policy issues that we care a lot about. I help lead the advocacy team for the company, and that's across the US, working really closely with our global colleagues that are based in Switzerland. I'd say in my home life, I have 3 young kids and a husband, and I work based out of the Arlington, Virginia, US headquarters for the company. The thing that's keeping me up right now is probably the thing that's keeping up everyone, and that is dealing with coronavirus, thinking about my mom and my older family members and family members of my friends. I grew up in upstate New York, and I have a 93-year-old grandmother that's living in New York, and I mostly am worried about her, and also what the social isolation is doing to her, which I know is impacting her. A fun fact, something that I'm trying to do to keep myself from losing my mind with homeschooling and remote work is some Netflix binge watching. I've been watching Schitt's Creek, which is hilarious and kind of keeping me laughing. I'm only watching comedies and funny things right now. I'm debating Tiger King. I haven't jumped in yet, so that's probably it for me.
Tiger King is highly recommended, and I've not yet watched the series finale of Schitt's Creek. Bob, I know you're a cinephile and you are watching a lot of movies. Give us a quick intro on you.
Yeah, hi. I'll get to the movies in a second, but thank you, Nicole and Brendan. And I'm Bob Stout. I'm the Vice President and Head of Policy for the U.S. for BP, based in the Washington, D.C. office. And I've actually been with the company for 28 years, had a variety of different roles, and have been here working in Washington for about the last 6 years, focused on policy in the regulatory area, and in particularly my role now as head of U.S. policy, focused on our highest priority issues. And there's no higher priority one than dealing with climate change and the energy transition and carbon policy. So I focus a lot on that. I also sit on our global policy making group, and I bring to them the U.S. perspective, and they make sure that we're acting consistently, and this is part of my role, with the global perspective on the issue. So what keeps me awake at night? It's the same as Nicole. And mostly thinking about, I'm on my own here, but thinking about the impact on family members and also people who are disadvantaged and really are being very badly hurt by the business. I mean, by the virus in their business or their personal life. I also want to add a ray of hope, which is I also hope that through this, people are going to realize increasingly how we're all interconnected, and maybe that will help us transform and move beyond some of the polarization. We're all part of a community. I'm enjoying a lot of different things. I meditate, so I've been enjoying a lot of online meditation sessions, but also the show Unorthodox on Netflix, which I commend everybody. And in that regard, because it deals with the Jewish community and my family is half Jewish, I just want to say happy Passover to everyone as well.
That's good.
Thanks, Bob. Well, you brought up COVID-19, and I do want to acknowledge that both of your companies provide critical services and infrastructure for the economy. And that need is heightened by the current pandemic. So I wanted to give you each a moment to talk about what you're doing and if it's enough to meet our current challenge.
Yeah. Bob, do you want to start?
I'm happy to, if you like. Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
mean, of course, it can never feel like enough. The enormity of it just is hard for us to think about. But as a company, we have to, and we're very much in action and sort of along three lines. There's, people, our employees, the community, and then of course the financial piece of it. But I really want to focus on the first two. So a big priority for us is obviously just the health and safety of our employees. And that ranges from those who were many and most of us working from home. And by the way, from the very beginning, long before it was mandated, quite early, we went to working from home for all folks who could. But we also have people who are working in plant environments or on, offshore rigs, and looking closely after their health as well is really important. We have waived, for the copays on testing for employees. We have, our CEO has given employees assurance with regard to continued employment and not being impacted in particular in the near term by COVID where we can. Just an interesting one too with employees is there's a big mental health component to this. And so we've really been encouraging people to seek out help, but also making tools available. And the most recent one, which really resonated with me, was Headspace. So we have a Headspace subscription now that we've made available to all employees, and they're beginning to use it. Communities obviously are also key. One of the things that our CEO recently said on this is this crisis has helped make clear that a world in which the sole objective of a company's purpose is to maximize profit is no longer acceptable. And it very much resonates with some of the things in your forecast. So we've done a lot of things. On the donation side, we made a $2 million donation to the World Health Organization. But we're also doing a lot of things individually through communities. And that includes, because we sell petrol, we've provided, for example, in the UK, free petrol to first responders. We are in Brazil, it's sort of interesting. We have a major biofuels joint venture, which makes sugarcane ethanol, and we've been able to turn them over to help produce disinfectant and supply local health services. And then the other piece I would say that's really important is communication through this. So both to external parties and within the company, we spent a lot of focus on communication. Nicole.
Yeah, sure. I think, I think these are fascinating historic times. The company, we are a critical part of the food supply, and so we do have a lot of employees that can't work from home that are essential workers. I think all of us are very much thinking about them and the sacrifices that they're making to make sure that food is on the shelves and that people have access to what they need. They're working day and night, and that includes folks who have actually volunteered to help stock shelves for our retail customers who have really been struggling to keep food and other supplies on shelves. And so we've had a tremendous amount of people volunteering to do that around the country. I think we definitely have tried to consider what our employees that are in the factories in particular are going through. We instituted kind of a pandemic pay bonus for those employees almost right away to give them some compensation, monetary compensation for what they're doing. We also have increased some of our mental health benefits for all of our employees who are dealing with stress and anxiety during this time. I mean, I think all of us are. And so just making that very clear and educating folks about what's there if they need that help. And encouraging them to take that help. Our waters business has donated 4 million bottles of water throughout the country to places where they have not had access, and there's a lot of vulnerable communities that don't have access to water. The supply is short in certain parts of the country. And then we do have brands that are major players in the restaurant industry, which has been devastated. And so we have our San Pellegrino sparkling water brand has donated $1 million to charities that are helping restaurant workers and small businesses in the restaurant field. Not to mention just food donations, 3 million pounds of food we've donated through our Feeding America partner. We know that our food pantries are very much in need and struggling, so we'll continue to monitor and probably increase some of those donations. And one of the ones that I thought was really just very thoughtful is we have a home delivery, a home meal service called Freshly, and they've partnered with Meals on Wheels to get some foods to our senior community, which was a kind of interesting way to use that part of our business for another vulnerable part of our population. So there's lots of global commitments we've given to American Red Cross. I mean, BP has done a ton in that space as well. So everyone's really trying to pitch in. But, I think in sitting here in the US and knowing that I'm in corporate headquarters and I can work remotely, my thoughts are really with the folks that are out there in the front lines and our first responders dealing with this upfront and personally.
Well, I'm glad that both of your companies have recognized how important mental health is during this pandemic. And Bob, I know that's a focus of Bernard Looney, your new incoming CEO, across well before the pandemic began. So let's dive into it. Well, each of your companies have made fairly ambitious net zero commitments in the past 6 months, and you were each the first in your sectors to do so. Well, Nestle says it wants to align with a 1.5 degree pathway. And you've also made a lot of commitments on plastics. And Bob, isn't it a contradiction for BP, an oil and gas company, to go net zero? Do you each have to turn your businesses upside down? Are you just going to lean on offsets with no real change? Are you accounting for scope 3? Unpack your commitments for us.
Would you like me to start, or Nicole, would you like to start? Happy either way.
Bob, you can start.
Okay. Those are really good questions, Brendan. And yes, and I mean, I would say a few things. It isn't really a contradiction because we've said for a long time, and everybody on this call, I'm sure knows it's true, that the world is on an unsustainable path. And we have to change that. So our new CEO came in February, announced a new purpose, and we're going to be a more purposeful company. And that purpose is reimagining energy for people and the planet. And so when you talk about a transformation, yes, it's going to require a major transformation. And we set forth an ambition for BP to become a net zero company by 2050, and also for BP to help the world get to net zero by 2050. And we have, and I'll just make everybody comfortable, say not going to go through all 10 of them in detail, but we have 10 aims around that, specific aims. 5 of those are around how we're going to get to net zero, and 5 of them are how to help the world. And around how we will get to net zero, we are dealing with really all 3 scopes of emissions. We are aiming to be net zero by 2050 with respect to our operational emissions, those that come from our operations, and that includes scope 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
And we also, though, have an aim for the oil and gas that we extract, our equity share of that. We have an aim to become net zero there as well. And that's a very challenging goal, aim, obviously. If you put those two together, it's about, make sure I get this right, 55 million tons for operational emissions and about 360 tons of emissions from the oil and gas that is produced, that share that we're counting. And that's roughly equivalent to the UK greenhouse gas emissions, which is the 6th largest economy. So it is a very big aim.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have to use a lot of different levers to get there. And it just requires a complete transformation for the company. That cannot be achieved just through offsets. I think offsets and natural climate solutions are an important part, and a number of your conferences, you brought that out. They need to be high quality, they need to be credible, valid, and transparent, et cetera. But it can't just be offsets. It's going to require major changes in our portfolio, some of which have already been underway and you've seen. As we move into renewables and other businesses, but also focus increasingly on advantaged oil, which is lower in carbon and highly economically competitive. And of course, with the market forces we're all facing right now, that will be increasingly important for those reasons as well. But also things like carbon capture and storage is going to be
Mm-hmm.
absolutely critical, and use of hydrogen. So we have set those aims, and I won't go into now the ones in terms of helping the world, but that includes our advocacy, which I'm sure we'll get to later. But we are serious about it. It's going to require profound change, and we're not going back.
Mm-hmm. Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo, I think we all understand that climate change is the biggest threat facing our society. It's certainly an existential threat to the food and beverage business, of which we're the world's largest company. And so it is critical that we're a leader in setting that bold ambition, the net zero by 2050. It's going to be hard. It's going to be very challenging. I think globally, scope 3 is almost accounts for 80% or 90% of what we have to tackle. It's going to be very difficult. I think that it will ultimately come down to a balance. Offsets will be a part of it. They have to be, to Bob's point, credible. They have to be reliable. It has to be well understood. Nestle is committed to transparency with that. It does not help us to, we know we're going to be scrutinized for everything that we do, that we report out, and so it doesn't help us to not be transparent about the way that we're trying to accomplish it. It also, it won't all be about offsets. It won't
Mm-hmm.
be, we will be getting off the grid. We will be very aggressive about renewable energy and renewable electricity. I think that we are in France 100% renewable. That is hard in the US. You know,
Mm-hmm.
my major focus is the US. And so to Bob's point as well, advocacy and public policy changes, we're willing to put our name behind some of those really big, hairy battles that are occurring at the states when it comes to renewable energy sourcing and common sense solutions to renewable. We are doing that and have done that in states like Ohio and in Virginia, and trying to make a difference where we have manufacturing, because in order for us to accomplish these goals, we have to be able to have the sources, the renewable options to really make a difference in carbon. And carbon is difficult when we start talking about plastics later. I mean, everything that we're doing in sustainability, there's a lot. There's a lot of commitments that companies like ours have, that Nestle has, and we have to make sure that we're balancing our carbon commitments to our plastic commitment, and our new packaging actually doesn't take us backwards on carbon. And it's not for the faint of heart. I'll say that. Um, you know, I think the other thing that we're doing when it comes to food and being a food manufacturer is trying to launch products that have a lower environmental impact. And so you'll see, you know, we've launched in all over the world, plant-based products. We had a big launch of our Awesome Burger in the US last year, and
Yeah.
the other types of plant-based options in the UK and other places. And you're going to see us offering those options out more and encouraging our consumers to try them.
Great. Well, I want to pick up a few threads from each of your comments, and there is a clarifying question from one of our attendees. Bob, can you define advantaged oil?
Yes, thank you. I was using a little techie talk there, so thank you for that question. Actually, what I'm talking about there, and it was in the context of portfolio management, is oil that is not only low cost, oil and gas, but you're looking at both cost, you're looking at emissions as well. And you know, in our industry historically, there's been this focus on volume of oil and gas production, and increasingly we're focusing more on values. So those barrels or that gas that is lower cost and lower emission is really what I was talking about, that will increasingly be focused on.
Right. And I do want to pick up on something else that you said. I've heard you say quite a bit recently how BP wants to help the world get to net zero. And Nicole, I've heard you share with the Future 500 Network how, for example, Nestle has led with others the Sustainable Food Policy Alliance, or SFPA. And with that, has really done some exciting things behind the scenes to pick things up. Now, you both are fans of voluntary measures because you think counterintuitively that voluntary measures can and sometimes do more than policy. As you know, outside advocates are skeptical of voluntary measures for many, many reasons. Can you unpack your perspectives a little for us?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start with this one. I mean, a lot of times when I'm speaking about the food and beverage industry and the consumer products goods companies, you know, I talk about us being under tremendous pressure and scrutiny because we are consumer facing organizations. And the truth of the matter is, in the era of social media and viral videos and viral tweets, everybody is consumer facing company, and everyone is under certain pressures and scrutinies to be authentic and transparent about the work that we're doing. I think that, you know, because of that, and because we know that climate related issues and inaction is a threat to our company and to our business and to our suppliers' businesses, we feel like we're going to try to do the right thing, and that many people in our industry are going to be trying to do the right thing. And the Sustainable Food Policy Alliance was created in 2018 by Nestle, Mars, Danone, and Unilever, really big food companies who are like-minded, particularly in the space of sustainability. And so we are using our collective voice to influence public policy. While I do think that companies like ours are going to continue to be aggressive on our carbon goals, on our GHG emission reduction goals, and we're going to report on our progress. And when we don't make our commitments by a certain year, you're going to see that. You're going to see that and be able to ask us questions about why that's not happening. Investors are going to ask us, and our consumers and our public are going to ask us. But I also will say that we did take a little bit of a turn in 2018 through the SFPA, and we did actually put forward principles that we would be okay with in federal policy. And we have said that we encourage local and state governments to look at those principles and to maybe do carbon pricing, which was a big step for us to say in the US, and what that would look like, how that would make sense for a company like ours, and to kind of open up the conversation to be at the table. We did see kind of a shift in interest from certain folks in power and policymaking positions, and so we really did want to be at the table for that. Yeah. If that were to be the case, and if that were to incentivize companies that are not doing the work that we're doing, we want to be there to say, you know, what we think that should look like and what the common sense parameters for that would be. Hopefully that answered the question about
and Bob, I know this is a topic you love to talk about. Share with us your perspectives.
Yeah, it's a great question. And thank you for what you shared, Nicole. Really good. I'm so glad you asked this question because a lot of people, when they hear industry talk about voluntary efforts, that often occurs as, yeah, we've got it handled. We're handling this
Mhm.
voluntarily. And this is not either or, it's both and. Both voluntary efforts by leading companies and leading companies helping encourage and show other companies who may be smaller and less aware how to get better in the voluntary side of dealing with emissions, as well as the need for policy. And that's one of the reasons we have 5 goals in one area, aims in one area, and 5 in the other. And I think both are absolutely critical. And I'm just going to give you a couple of specific examples. And one would be in the area of methane emissions. And everybody knows methane, a very powerful greenhouse gas, needs to be reduced. And it's also a good example of where there's both a business reason, because natural gas is still an important part of the energy mix. And we're the largest seller of natural gas in North America, for example. But if we do not reduce the methane emissions and get them down to the minimum, as close to zero as we can. Gas doesn't have its advantage over coal. It's not achieving what it needs to do in terms of getting to net zero. So we have on our own set some very stringent goals for reducing methane emissions. And we've also said that we're gonna, and this is an important piece of voluntary efforts,
Mm-hmm.
you have to measure, you have to verify. So we're
Mhm.
installing measurement at all of our major sites so we know what they actually are and not just emissions factors. On the other hand, in order to make sure that the problem is handled broadly, and we believe at a federal level, we have supported the continued direct regulation of methane by the EPA and the federal
Mhm.
government. And we've been very vocal about that. And I think that's a good example of where you have to have both. You need to establish a floor, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, leading companies also need to step forward and do things voluntarily. And the other example I would give is carbon pricing is so critical to catalyze and to make economic on a broad level a lot of the technologies that will be needed to get to net zero. And that includes carbon capture and storage. That does not mean, however, that we as an industry should not play our part voluntarily, as we are through groups like the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, to actually get CCUS up at scale. It's absolutely critical to get to net zero. So that's another example of where we need to do that. Individual leading companies working with other companies voluntarily, yes, but also working and advocating together, not just with other companies, but with a broad range of groups such as are on this phone to actually get supporting policies.
Mm-hmm. That's tremendously helpful. And we have questions rolling in from attendees. I want to touch base on 2 points and then dive right into those. I want to talk a bit about political polarization. Nestle and BP are both global companies. I remember I had one executive tell me once that at her company, having 1 foot in Europe and 1 foot in the US, it was almost schizophrenia and aimed at the expectations on her company. Certainly here in the US, political polarization is a huge problem. And you each operate in geographies with completely different attitudes when it comes to sustainability, climate change. How do you navigate that and avoid the sense that you need to just keep your head down below the fray?
I mean, I'll say I don't think that anyone would allow us to keep our head down. In Bob's introduction of himself, he talked about his responsibilities for aligning global goals and commitments and engagement, and U.S. engagement and execution, and all of those things. And where I sit in my company, we do the same. And it is challenging at times. I would say our politics in the different regions are different. I stopped predicting U.S. politics a couple years
Long
ago,
ago.
but I think that the company's purpose, goal, commitment, vision to reducing our footprint and to being a good corporate citizen, reducing plastic waste, that doesn't change. That's the same. It's the company's goals and visions and commitments are the same. There are factors that alter the way that we execute on them and the way that we advocate in different regions. But for the most part, we're aligned. And my global colleagues, manage European politics and what's happening there, and very much are influencing more action and in the EU. And I'm doing the same here at the federal and state and local level. It's just our approaches may be a little bit different, but the truth of the matter is when I can talk to conservative US politicians about how climate change is impacting our business, our pumpkin harvest in Illinois that produces our Libby's pumpkin brand, and how climate change is impacting the way that we can harvest pumpkins, that's very real to them. I can explain to them what will happen to our company over a certain amount of years if inaction continues. And they care about that. They care about the ability for Nestle to spend CapEx in their states and their localities.
Yeah.
And if I can show them how I have to divert resources in order to make our harvest and our supply chains more resilient, and how I would maybe not have to do that if certain things were to happen over time, then that's powerful to them. And so that's what we spend our advocacy resources doing, is to try to influence that way, making the business case.
Thank you, Nicole. Yes, and no, neither of us can, and our companies can keep our heads down. So what I was going to say, and not to be cute about it, but I think to solve this problem, to get to net zero, we have to move from polarization to collaboration. I'll start with the sort of the global and local, or the local aspect of this. Obviously, we're a company that operates in many different environments around the world. We have to work with a whole range of diverse interests and governments and diverse interests within our industry. And we need to sort of build those relationships with integrity and to be effective. But at the same time, we have to be consistent in our policy on a global level. And that's one of the reasons I think it's so important that our incoming CEO not only set these 5 aims for what we do voluntarily, but 5 very clear aims that people are going to hold us to in terms of what we will do in our advocacy and as we collaborate with others. I also want to address a really important question that I see has come up, and it's a good example of moving from polarization to collaboration, I hope, and I'm seeing. And that is, many of you will know, I have to address an elephant that's probably sitting in a lot of rooms, might even be in mine, hiding somewhere, about a certain ballot initiative in Washington State that BP and a number of other companies opposed.
Bob, if I can take a moment, for those who don't know, that was a carbon pricing ballot initiative in 2018.
Yes.
That was defeated by voters, and BP was one of the lead opponents in that ballot initiative in Washington.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. But actually, and I don't want to get back into the why or wherefore about that. We obviously had some policy concerns with that particular thing. It had exceptions, et cetera, et cetera. But we get it, and our CEO gets it. In fact, was very open when he gave his first talk about that specific issue and that example, that people looked at that and said, well, you're letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. And it doesn't feel to us that you're really serious about carbon pricing when we see so often industry and sometimes BP opposing that. And that was an example of that. I would say we get that. And it's one of the reasons we've been so speaking so strongly in terms of our aims, but also even more so since then in the state of Washington. We've worked very closely with the legislature, and we were doing it before the ballot initiative, but we worked very closely to support and publicly supported cap and trade, the net zero bill there, and also even a clean air regulation, which although we prefer to see a market-based solution like cap and trade, in that case, we felt that that was an important part of the mix, so we supported that publicly. We've been doing the same in the state of Oregon, and I want to touch on, I'm happy to talk about this more, because this is really important in terms of the polarization to collaboration point. In the Northeast U.S. right now, we have RGGI, the regional greenhouse gas initiative, which governs the power sector, being rolled out in Virginia and Pennsylvania, and we are vocally supporting that. But also something called the Transportation Climate Initiative, which Georgetown put together with a broad range of stakeholders, and we are supporting through op-eds by our U.S. Chairman and President, but also sitting down with a wide range of groups, environmental groups that we don't normally work with day to day, arm in arm to try to get that passed, because it's a good policy. We believe it's good for business. It's very important to net zero to show proof of concept of carbon pricing and how it can work. It builds on the success of the RGGI program, the power sector there. And what I would say finally on all of this is, those of you out there, watch what we do, pay attention. I know you will. And we are serious about it. But a lot of that is getting together and working collaboratively instead of working against each other.
I think a lot of it comes down to a question on a lot of people's minds: are you genuine? And that's the challenge you face in your next moves as you announce your new ambitions, Bob. And rolling up some of the audience questions into another area where people are wondering if Nestle is genuine, and that's on plastics. And Nestle has made some big commitments. Of course, when you walk into a grocery store and you see Nestle products, you see them all wrapped in plastic. Greenpeace just issued a report that basically said plastics aren't actually recyclable in practice and in terms and globally. Nicole, Nestle has said it wants to, quote, lead the shift. And what does that mean? And are you genuine?
Yeah, I mean, this is a challenge for our company. It's a serious one. It's one that our consumers are demanding of us. They're making decisions at the shelf based on the way that companies are improving their packaging and their containers. Our employees are demanding this of us too. They care about the environment just as well. They're consumers as well. Our leaders are incredibly passionate about it. Our global CEO, Mark Schneider, talks about our commitment to decreasing plastic waste and marine debris. He's extremely passionate about that personally. And it's a difficult thing. I think for the folks who say just leave plastic, we make food, and there are incredible packaging necessities for food safety, some of which can be we can innovate around and find new packaging materials, and some of which those alternatives do not exist yet for certain types of foods. And so we have to balance our need to reduce plastic, and we're doing that. And a lot of brands, Nestle Waters is a leader in the bottled water industry for decreasing virgin plastic. They have whole brands that are no longer using virgin plastic. They have shifted to recycled content. We're doing that for a lot of our other packages as well, and for a lot of our other brands. And we're working on, what we call the negative list, those materials that we don't have material recycled content for yet. Nestle in January announced a $2 billion investment in food grade recycled content to develop in the places where we don't have that today. Is a pretty big research and development investment that we're going to be making. But yeah, this is a global problem. It requires best practices that I've talked to my global colleagues in Brazil and Colombia. What are they doing to impact change? We have a major infrastructure problem in the US around recycling systems. COVID has only complicated that. So, how do we support infrastructure incentives for infrastructure investment in our local MRFs? And we are working closely with incredible national partners like the Recycling Partnership, like the Closed Loop Fund, to figure out what those infrastructure needs are, to invest in the places where we can, and to also hopefully incentivize end markets so that the recycled content, retains value or increases its value. So yeah, we are going to be leading the shift, and I hope that the evidence of what we can accomplish helps our people who are critical of that, to figure out that we're actually in this for the long haul.
Hey,
Right.
Brendan, can I add one thing just really quickly? And
30
just in
seconds,
that,
yeah.
thank you, it will be, I promise. BP, this is an area of actual business opportunity where we're working through a company called Infinia, a venture we have, which actually can take very hard to recycle PET plastics, like colored bottles and so on, down to actual virgin material, and therefore begin the creation of greater recyclability and more of a circular economy. And one of one things our CEO always says is, let's not just look at this as a risk standpoint for our core businesses now. Let's look at it as opportunity to create new businesses.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, the questions are continuing to flow in. We probably have about 30 of them, which is more than we can answer. I do want to let people know that we'll be sticking around until about 4:10 Eastern time to answer some of the questions. But a number coming in about the current pandemic, and one from Kenneth Richards that I'm going to paraphrase. You know, Bob, you mentioned that the company has pushed. Oh, do you know what? I apologize. This document shifted on me.
It's okay.
Good intentions oftentimes fall by the wayside in the midst of a crisis.
Yeah.
And we're in the midst of a crisis right now. How are your companies going to keep that momentum? Are they?
You want me to start with that one, Nicole?
Yeah.
We are committed to it. I mean, our Bernard, our CEO, has said that the current crisis has reinforced his belief that reimagining energy and reinventing BP is critical, and that includes not only the coronavirus, but also the sudden plummet in oil prices and so on. So I think in the long run, there's no question this is where we need to go, and I think the level of activity I still see in the company around this, it continues, and so I think it is going to be tough, without a doubt, in the near term, to do everything we would like to do in this space. But I don't think we can turn away from it. And I think if you are a company, a global company with a long-term perspective, you have to be able to. I mean, this great Scott Fitzgerald quote about the sign of a first-rate intelligence is to be able to hold two contradictory minds, ideas at the same time and function. That's what we have to do. I do worry also, though, about it on the policy side, which is, those are the vineyards that I'm working in a lot of the time. Will we be able to get the support for carbon pricing and other things like that? I hope that we will, and I hope that people will take a lesson from what we see with the coronavirus and the risks, that we need to act together as a community, and this is a really urgent risk to get at. So it will be tough, but we can't take our eye off that ball, and I don't think we will.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. I think the country is focused right now, and our leaders are focused on getting us out of this pandemic and supporting our communities. But I do think there's going to be some behavior change that comes out of all of this in a lot of different ways. And I'm hoping that we come out of this with that when we come out of this, it includes a broad look at how we can be improving society in ways that we're not. Consumer behavior and business behavior. I think that we're not gonna release our foot off the pedal when it comes to our big commitments here. We can't. Sure, right now, when I look at what our U.S. leadership is focused on, it's about getting through right now and making sure we can get our supply, continuing. But we are still having conversations about what we're going to do with packaging this year. That's not going to change. We already have those investments set. So we definitely will continue doing this.
Great. Bob, a question for you. I'm quoting this. I wonder whether BP will agree to independent verification of their net zero achievements. I also wonder if it's another PR move, knowing that they have 30 years ahead of them and no interim targets, or do they?
Yeah, good questions. And I understand. I mean, it's a big ambition to talk about net zero by 2050 and a lot of big aims. The first thing I want to make clear is, yes, there will be interim targets, there will be specific plans, and more will be revealed on that later at something we call Capital Markets Day later this year. And that's really just the beginning, because there are lots of different forms of transparent reporting. In fact, one of our aims is specifically about more transparent reporting needed, and I know people will be watching, including many of those on this webcast, to see what we're doing and looking for us to verify it. There's our annual sustainability report, which has gotten increasingly detailed and is verified by E&Y. We also accepted a shareholder resolution, which requires us, and we've already done the first version of this, to report against how our strategy is consistent with Paris. So there's that. There's the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, which we've recently come out quite clearly to support. All of those things are really important, but I should add too that some of the aims we've set out, for example, with respect to methane, we've set specific targets on reducing that, and I think you'll see more and more of that. But I don't want to discount it. As you are looking at a giant global oil and gas company, I don't want to discount the import and an engineering culture of coming out and saying, you know what? We're going to set a mark on the wall that we're going to be net zero by 2050. And that actually has raised a lot of eyebrows. So I think that is extremely important. And I already see this happening day to day, working within the company, that's being driven through culture and operations. And one last thing I want to mention in that regard is that we are also tying global employee compensation to achievement of these objectives. So like 10%, let's say, of about 37,000 employees bonus is going to be tied to what we call sustainable emissions reductions targets. So you have to drive this through the organization on all levels. But definitely we will report against it. We'll report against it transparently. And we expect folks to call us to task on whether we're really, taking steps along the way and on the path to achieving it.
Bob, I think tying compensation to achievement of these goals is a big deal, and it relates to something we've discussed and won't have time to cover here, but just the massive internal reorganization underway at BP, away from any traditional structure within the oil and gas industry to something completely new, built around these objectives. Well, I'll leave it to folks to reach out to you on that, but I did want to raise a question that's for Nicole here, and it comes from Conrad McKieran with As You Sow. Nestlé has taken some encouraging steps on plastic pollution, such as committing to reduce the use of virgin plastic and investing in the market for recycled content. However, it has not committed to absolute reduction of plastic use as your competitor Unilever has. Given the huge amounts of plastics flooding waterways, are you willing to commit to absolute reduction?
I think, well, I kind of touched on this a little bit. Absolute reduction in some of our packaging containers today is not quite possible. However, because of the food safety issues around some of the foods that we have, and one of the other goals that we wouldn't want to ignore is around food waste and increasing shelf stability for some of our products that would require some level of plastic, at least right now. What we are committing to is incredible investment in finding alternative solutions in the places where we can't today say we will completely take plastic out of our packaging. And I think that will go a long way. We've also committed to certain coalitions that are looking for some of those alternatives as well. We are going really far in finding some of those plastic alternatives. Can I say tomorrow that we're going to be out of plastic completely by 2025? No. And that's why we are trying to, really rely on the circular economy and trying to really focus on post-recycled content and finding the places so we're not putting more new plastic into the environment. That's really our number one focus right now.
Thanks. A few questions here for Bob. I'm going to give you both of them at once. First from Ken Strossner. In making the transformation of BP, how do you balance the need for continued profits from your oil and gas business with the investments needed to pursue new low carbon products and meet your 2050 objectives? And also a question about your key strategies to reduce scope 3 emissions with partners and customers. Question from John Lovenberg.
Yeah, those are really good questions. We call it performing while transforming. We have to continue performing as an oil and gas company. We have to do that in order to reach these aims and aspirations, but also continue to pay a healthy dividend to our shareholders and a good return. And I mean, the fact is, you know, and that oil and gas is going to be needed for quite a while. And I think if, to the extent that we are continuing to focus on managing costs effectively, and also, as I mentioned before, you know, finding, rather than focusing on big volumes, finding good profitable opportunities in that core business, that is still going to be an important part of our business. But I think also ventures that also can be profitable. We now have a very large and profitable wind business. We also have a growing solar development business. Some of you may remember many, many years ago under Lord Brown, we were in solar, but it was manufacturing solar panels, which ended up not to be a good business to be in. But actually, solar development is a very good business to be in. And by supporting it through this 50-50 venture with Lightsource BP, we can you know, basically unlock a lot of other capital to sort of continue growing there. We have a major, I think somebody asked about biofuels. We have a major biofuels business, sugarcane ethanol production, with a 50-50 venture with a company called Bunge in Brazil. And I think that's the second largest sugarcane ethanol producer. So there are a lot of these. And then there are smaller ventures we have. I mean, Lightsource BP has grown, but there are also smaller ventures such as Fulcrum Bioenergy, which is making jet fuel, biojet, from municipal waste. So, I mean, there are many, many business opportunities like this. And just to touch briefly on the reorg and the restructuring of the company, I won't go into the detail, but we are completely reinventing the company. So we're building businesses, including directly reporting to our CEO, that focuses on this. So we have a gas and low carbon business. We also have a business which focuses on regions and cities and solutions, and developing solutions that we can scale up sort of on an integrated basis. We've always had this idea. So let's say a government has a goal of a certain goal of carbon reduction. Can we bring them a mix of energy solutions that help them meet their energy needs, but also reduce emissions? So I think it's going to be a combination of all those things. It is, I am not meaning at all, because it's a really good question, to diminish the challenge of trying to do this, especially in the tough times we're in. But the last thing I want to say is, I believe this is what the market wants. And many in our industry, I think, understandably, we get frustrated. We're like, how can you expect us to put all this money, you know, no carbon price, put all this money into these new technologies and develop them, while we're also, you know, having to be a profitable company in the oil and gas business? And the answer is, we have to find a way to do both if we want to be here in the long term. And I think we have strategies that we're developing that will let us do that. And that's what bankers, that's what the financial market, and ultimately shareholders will want as well.
Thanks, Bob. A few questions about policy, and I'll note it's 1 minute after the hour. We'll stay for just about 9 more minutes. A question.
We're having too much fun.
A question for Nicole. Bob referenced the Transportation and Climate Initiative in the Northeast. Robert Miner is wondering if Nestle has a stance on that or is considering supporting it. And then a question from Bill Weil. Where does BP stand on the rollback of the Clean Car Standard?
On the TCI, I don't think we have publicly supported that yet, but we have considered it, and we've talked to a few of our other partners that we tend to partner with on advocacy, specifically, definitely in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast regions, about it. So it's definitely on our, you know, we definitely know about it. We're considering it. It's not something that's off the table for us, for sure.
Great. Bob, Clean Car Standards?
Clean car standards. Well, I mean, we are, a couple things. We have and we've spoken to, we've sent a letter, which I believe was made public to the administration on this. We think vehicle efficiency, a CAFE standard, and all of that is an important part of this. We think we also, in terms of cleaner fuels, I mean, in addition to biofuels, we also have a big lubricants business. So there's a lot we can do through producing better products and lower emission products, lower sulfur, et cetera, et cetera. But also we're very much involved in electrification, and we see opportunity there. We have a large venture called ChargeMaster that we support in the UK, and we're putting charging stations in our they call them forecourts over there, our service station complexes, and so there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think you'll see us increasingly sort of moving into that space. And again, this is more just like we talked about with advocacy. This is an either or. It's it's and it's got to be a combination of all of these things, sort of building and scaling up over time.
Great. We have time for one, maybe two more questions, and one that has come in about Scope 3 from Bruce Clafter. What are some of the strategies you anticipate using relative to Scope 3 emissions? And when you obtained internal approval, did you place a price tag on the program?
The last price tag, you mean like an internal carbon price? Is that the question? Maybe.
I don't, as I'm reading it, I don't believe it's an internal carbon price. I think it was, what's the cost estimate of addressing Scope 3 is how I'm reading it.
Yeah, that's a hard one. If you say, what's the cost estimate to get to net zero when in our company? But and I'm not being facetious, because the question is actually a really important one. So what I think has most been noticed is this commitment that we've made for the oil and gas, our equity share. And I saw somebody ask that question. So this is our equity share, excluding a shareholding that we have in Rosneft, which is a Russian oil and gas company, but it's our equity share of what is produced, and that's what we're saying we're going to get to net zero on. And exactly how we're going to, this is why it's interesting and why it's important to set this, exactly how we're going to do that, we can't say that, but we do know that there are major levers. And I mentioned in particular, and I just want to emphasize this one, we talked about natural climate solutions. Those are important, but CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage just absolutely has to scale up. I mean, the International Energy Agency, everybody who looks at this says the cost of trying to get to net zero without it is just impossible. And I'll just mention one thing we're doing there, and this is in combination with other companies through the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, is in the UK. We have a big project called Teesside, where we're going to actually take the carbon from a gas power plant, and put that into reservoirs in the North Sea, and also in that town, which is very industrial, create other opportunities to sort of do carbon storage programs. So those are going to be really critical things. Hydrogen, blue and green hydrogen, and some of you will know what I'm talking about, but this blue hydrogen is basically taking natural gas and pulling the carbon out and then storing it or using it for other products. That also is a business opportunity and going to be an important part of the solution. It's going to take a combination of a lot of things to actually deliver this.
Right. Well, I think, Nicole, we'll end with you, Nicole, on the Scope 3 question. What are Nestle's strategies? How are you planning around it?
So I don't know all of the strategies. I know that we have a plan to publish kind of a working document, a plan for how we're going to get to Scope 3. I think the last I saw is we're supposed to be publishing that Q1 of 2021. So we're a little bit out from having a finalized strategy for that. It's going to be complex. It is a big part of Scope 3, is definitely the largest part of what we need to develop a target around. And so, yeah, I think that we're working really diligently on that, but we don't really have a set plan quite yet. We kind of needed to we thought it was important to be out there on the goal, because I think it has a domino effect for our supply chain once we say that that's our goal. And it also encourages other of our competitors to also step out and do the same. And so it was important that we step out and make the goal, but we haven't quite put all the pieces together for exactly what that looks like.
Great. Well, unfortunately, I think that's all we have time for today. I want to note for everyone in attendance that we have been cataloging your questions, and we'll see if we can get more of them answered. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Go to future500.org/summit for our upcoming schedule. And we want to encourage everyone to stay safe, sane, and sanitized.
Yes.
All in this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan. Thanks
Thank you,
for the
Brenda.
questions.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, everybody, for the great questions.